Welcome to On Record by Optimize One. So we're your hosts, the co-founders of Optimize One, where we help some of the world's most ambitious startups and scale-ups build exceptional teams. On this podcast, we're basically going on record on what actually works in hiring, leadership, sales, startups, and building exceptional companies. Whether you're a founder, hiring manager, revenue leader, or someone looking to accelerate a career, you're in the right place. So thanks for tuning in. So this is On Record by Optimize One. Let's get into it. I'm really excited to talk about today's topic, actually. It is ultimately this whole idea of going beyond job boards and understanding how great companies really hire. So there's this big myth that if you have a strong employer brand, you just post a job online and wait for the top amazing talent to come into your organization. Carolina, why do you think this is an important topic from your point of view?
A lot of people seem to think that hiring is very much black and white. It's a straight linear line that if you post a job with really fancy words, you're going to get the top applicants applying. And I think now more than ever, this topic is really relevant because of, unfortunately, right now what's happening in tech, where there's so many layoffs. Every week we hear about big company layoffs, and a lot of really talented people are finding themselves in very, very vulnerable situations right now. So we have a lot of noise in the market where a role gets posted and you often see it with 100 plus applicants. Therefore, hiring manager thinks, oh, I'm good. I just post a job and that the top creme de la creme will be my ATS. And the problem is that sometimes those people are not necessarily applying to everything that they read online. One, because they see 100 plus applicants, why bother? Two, because some might not even be actively looking for work. So I think that the big myth or assumption is that one job post online is going to get you what you need in order to scale or fill those gaps that you currently have in your team. For me, the biggest lesson from working with some really high growth companies was that never assume that that's the solution, and that hiring goes a lot more further than just posting something online and hoping that it sticks. The biggest surprise was when I joined HubSpot a little bit after the pandemic, which I was quite surprised because I was thinking, oh, wow, this company really has a huge army of a recruiting team. And then they also have a dedicated sourcing team. But what actually really surprised me when I joined and I started taking care of the go-to-market team there was that they also used external agencies for their hiring. A lot of people are familiar with HubSpot, and they have an incredible employer brand. You would think externally, just looking at HubSpot, that, oh, they're sorted. Everyone's flocking to work there. They definitely do not use agencies, but actually they do. So that was really surprising for me to find out.
They're so well known for being experts, obviously, at content marketing. Most people know their CRM. They're super, well known. They have so much media, social media, general media. I think they're the founders and CEOs and the C-level all have huge presences on LinkedIn and all over the kind of tech sphere. So that definitely is surprising, for sure. Actually, I had a similar situation, I would say, when I was working at Facebook. It was called Facebook at the time, in 2014 to 2017. That was really kind of the peak of what was then known the FANG companies. Everyone wanted to work at those organizations. They had very big employer brands as well. And also there was very large recruiting teams, sourcing teams, coordination teams, and talent intelligence. And back then that was a relatively new function. Facebook was one of the first innovators to actually invest in talent intelligence and in sourcing as a dedicated separate function, which had a lot of investment. And also we were using a lot of different cool internal tools that the Facebook engineers built. And it was also really surprising because despite that, there was still the need to work with external agencies, even though there was such a brand, and even though there was some good applications on that, you still had the sourcers that were reaching out to talent, and maybe the talent wouldn't respond at all. And just really finding that top 1% meant that we had to work with external recruiters because they really had those deep level relationships with people that the company didn't have those people were in the market. They were talking to the top people within, at the time, also like advertising agencies, because of obvious reasons, a lot of advertising agencies are super key in that whole ecosystem of advertising on Facebook, etc. So it was absolutely surprising as well. You would think that if you have an army of 200 people in the recruiting team, that's enough, and you have an employer brand, and you just post the job and wait. At the time, it was like Facebook, Google, Amazon. Those were the main kind of brands at the time. And we would kind of say, well, actually, at Facebook, it's still talent acquisition rather than talent screening. So it's not just post a job and screen the talent. You're still trying to acquire them. And there's always some sort of limit. So where there's a limit, where there's a gap, and where there's something really, really niche, we're still using agencies. So there's always space for them.
I don't know if it was the same for you, but there's only so much of the market that you can cover. I remember that HubSpot, I was responsible at the beginning when I joined for the business development representative team. And then I eventually moved into hiring their mid-market, AE function. But even for BDRs, we used agencies. And that was really interesting. We also had a dedicated sourcing team, but my BDR had like a broader scope where I focused on hiring, for EMEA and UKI. But then when I joined the mid-market team, it was only for UKI. We had a sourcer for that, but there's only so much of the UK and Ireland market that you can cover, basically, that even your sourcer can cover. And there are some gaps that you might miss. There are some profiles that you might miss. And what people don't realize is that internal TA, we're not just dedicating to just candidate only. So our job is to train hiring managers on how to interview better, diversity and inclusion, workshops, doing events, and then interviewing candidates, moving them along, offers, and the talent mapping. So the difference is that for HubSpot, we didn't want to waste time. We were always under pressure to hire. There's revenue to meet there. There's deadlines to meet there. They needed a backup. That's how they used agencies there. So as an external extension of their in-house team. For BDR, for me, it was the language rules. I didn't have so much visibility into the Nordics, and we needed a BDRs to cover that market. Those are very few profiles in the markets for that could actually speak Swedish, and that they are actually want to do this job, and that they're actually the BDRs that we need for HubSpot. There's only so much of the talent that is available for you, and you want to make sure that you have access to that talent.
If you were to look at the available talent as like a pie chart, there's only like an actual circle, a pie chart. What is the source of your hire, but also what access do you actually have? There's always a limitation. You don't have access to 100% of the market. So you might have access through referrals, people referring people in. That's also like a pretty good source of hire. At Facebook, that's like 30% of the hiring was through referrals. Great. But also there's a limit. At some point, the people that are referring others in, they're going to stop referring, or you don't know exactly the quality. So there's still a bit of vetting that needs to be done. Doesn't mean it's the top 1%. Then, of course, there's like the applications. Then there's like in-house sourcing, and then there's still a huge chunk of the pie, which you just don't have access to due to the things that you mentioned. That kind of reminds me of another situation where I was working at Zoom. I literally joined at the start of the pandemic, so it's April 2020. The whole world shut down. Suddenly, everybody needed video conferencing, and the customers that were using Zoom already, they also needed a high level of dedicated customer success and service. So basically, we're hiring across all functions, sales, marketing, customer success, absolutely everything. And there's so much pressure. And, we kind of opened up 19 new geographical markets in 12 months. So there was a lot to do.
That's a lot of pressure.
Yeah, it's like, one minute you're talking to someone in the US and the next minute you're talking to someone in Japan, which kind of brings me to the point. So even there, where there was still also a good brand, everyone suddenly knew what Zoom was because they had to use it. We also used an agency, and that was, when we were expanding into the APAC market. So basically, it was looking for salespeople, enterprise AEs, and also enterprise sales directors to be based out of Tokyo. And yeah, that situation, that particular external company, like they already had the relationships, they understood the cultural context, they could actually, speak Japanese as well. Obviously, usually it's sort of bilingual, but there is talent out there is not necessarily always 100% bilingual. They do business in Japanese anyway. So they really had those trusted long-term relationships, which are needed, and they understood the cultural context. And that's just something that we as a European-based recruiting team didn't have, and that they've solved a huge problem and a real problem, that the company had from a hiring perspective. An external provider can really fill an important gap when you're trying to extend into an emerging market. At the end of the day, it's about knowing when to invest in like that kind of partnership. So again, you don't just post the job in Tokyo and hope that the right people come in. They may not at all.
I mean, I don't know how it was, when you worked at Zoom. I'm assuming that you also had many people applying for jobs there. So yes, It actually brings me back to the world we're in now, the kind of market we're navigating right now, which is post a job online and there's 200 applicants per role, sometimes even more. We were working on a role recently and we had 1,000 applicants. The difference is that as an agency, that's your job to look at all those applicants, to speak to as many people that approach you as possible, register them, to understand what they're looking for. But when you have an internal team, for instance, I didn't have time sometimes to look through 2,000 applicants. It's creating this friction, right? I see candidates that are frustrated. It's completely valid. I see sometimes companies that are overwhelmed. So I would say that that's a good time as well to bring in an external agency to help you alleviate that pressure of your internal team. If you're a hiring manager or a co-founder having to look through 1,000 applications, people might say, oh, well, this is why we have AI interview screening. I've seen some jobs, for instance, that they have Loom, apply using a Loom. And while that's great and all, I think that you still need someone to watch those Looms. So you're not necessarily saving time, because the Looms, they could be 1 minute, 2 minutes, but still as a hiring manager, if you want to have access, to great people, you need to listen to all those Looms. I've always been an advocate that not the entire story is in the candidate's CV, and this is why you need to speak to them, because it's not a whole picture. This is why I was wondering, about Zoom, because I think it's pretty similar. When you joined during the pandemic, was it also a time when you were flooded with applicants? Why did you outsource sometimes?
So it was kind of an interesting time where, because of COVID, a lot of companies shut down their businesses. Part of the market was a bunch of companies shutting down and all this talent available. And the other part of the market was kind of like those maybe more software businesses like Zoom video conferencing or other sort of tools where actually they were expanding. So there was still a lot of available talent that was interested, so to speak. It's really when it comes down to something very specific and very niche. So that's sort of why we needed external help, and also like the revenue impact. So, okay, maybe we could have filled the Japanese speaking, account executive role ourselves, but how long would that take? Maybe it would have taken 6 months. So if you think about the business like ROI, you hire someone, you hire someone, they may not ramp straight away. So you've got like the 6-month hiring timeline and then another 6 months for them to ramp. So you've lost so much revenue. But the speed at which, if you can increase the speed at which you hire that person, that is an actual revenue impact, because then they can, join the company earlier. Like they are, they can ramp up, understand the product, and they can start selling to customers and dealing with customers. And also at the time, it was more like answering customer requests because they were coming in because of the demand, because of the shutdown. So it's sort of like you're losing revenue. Literally, leads are coming in and there's no one that speaks Japanese to be able to close those leads, to be able to build those relationships. That was definitely a huge trigger. So if you're a founder, when do you think about when you should look into external support?
I do want to clarify something. I understand that, Zoom and HubSpot and Facebook are at a completely different stage as companies. Mm-hmm. For me, is when you would have a first GTM role, for example, because time is money, money is time. It brings me back to what you were saying. Zoom was missing out on leads because no one was speaking Japanese. They were missing out on revenue. So if you're a founder and you want to expand in the US or in the UK, or it's just your first AE hire, I would strongly consider using an external provider for that, because the 1 week that person is not in seat, you're missing revenue. In HubSpot, even the BDRs and the mid-market AEs, they had ramp up time. So if I didn't hire a mid-market person, which basically the mid-market cycle there, 1 month to 3 months, the SMB could be 1 week to a month, I would give it a good 3 to 6 months that person is not going above target. So that's revenue lost, for example. And the sooner that you get that person in your company, the better. That for me would be the first most crucial time to use an agency. Second one, I would say, would be more of a niche.
Absolutely. I think niche, like you said, and also founding, but also where there's, a clear ROI in the sense that you really need this person. And especially if you're a small company, each hire makes a very big difference. So let's say it's like a head of marketing. So maybe you already have like a cool product that you built, great software or innovative product, and you want to get it out there. You want to actually, showcase what you're doing, what you're solving. In this case, a head of marketing would really solve that. So at the end of the day, when it comes to like the ROI, if it's sales also, and even if it's marketing, a fee that's 10,000 starts to look very little compared to like the 100,000, let's say 100,000 deal or 100,000 revenue that someone can bring in as a result of their work. I think another one would be, again, kind of early stage. So let's say you've built your MVP, you've got some funding, Series A, and now you actually need some really excellent software engineers, founding software engineers who can actually build out everything and deliver that product to the market. Like you've already created something super exciting. You've already created something which is going to solve a very important business problem. And now you actually need to build out this entire software, end to end. So we're talking about full stack engineers or senior engineering leadership that have really built things and really know the entire software development cycle. I would say that's also a good time to really think about investing in an external provider and really de-risking that hire, because you've got your Series A funding. If you want to have access to the top 1%, they tend to be passive talent.
You don't have time, if you're a 10-person, 30-person company, to look through all those hundreds and thousands of applicants if you post, one role online. At the same time, if you don't have an employer brand, that is also a good time to think about how you can make your hiring a little bit more streamlined. If you're a very small company that just started out, maybe not that many people have heard of you. So you need someone to basically be in market, speaking to candidates about you and telling candidates, hey, why this is important, why they should take a leap. There's a lot of people at the moment that are hesitant, for instance, to join, startups, especially if you haven't received funding yet.
It's kind of the way that I would look at it is that you don't have an employer brand where you're pretty small. At some point in the initial stages, you're like 10 people, and then you're hiring people that you kind of know, then you're hiring referrals, and then maybe you hire referrals of referrals, maybe alumni from like the same university or something. When we go back to that pie, you don't have that's a small slice of the talent market. And so as a startup, you just don't have access to it. So if you want to have access to it, then that's the right time. And to your point, it's also about, okay, you don't have the time to talk to a certain number of people and really get them excited about your company, and then sort of like also vet them and understand if they're the right fit. You want to only spend a few hours of your time with the top people on really high quality conversations, really high quality interviews, and really effective use of your time. You want to focus on that. You don't want to be wasting time, talking to 30 people who are not really that interested or not relevant to skills or just, not the best out there. So think about what else you could be doing with that time if you're a founder. I think that's also a key thing to think about.
And you might not have a head of people in place, right? So that's because you don't see that, as a necessity at the moment. Let's say want flexibility. You need someone just to kind of plug and go. But that's the benefit using an external partner, is that you can kind of say, I don't need this now. And it really helps when you're in a position, when you're just starting out, when you're trying to raise funding. If you're a founder right now, that's what I would look at. And don't assume that just by posting a job online, you're going to get the best of the best, because even these huge companies don't think that. And I think that they definitely have understood that for a long time. And this is why great talent works there. It's because they have a well-built machine that's basically all work cohesively together. So internal TAs, they work with the sourcing team, and they also work with the external agency. It's a machine this is why you see such brilliant people end up, working at these companies. It's not because they necessarily applied. It's because someone approached them and talked to them about, the opportunity.
So we've discussed quite a lot. Maybe we can talk about the myths versus reality.
Yeah, this is my favorite. So I would say first myth is, well, we'll just post a job and see what happens, right? Which is what we were discussing earlier. So what would you say the reality of that is?
Well, the reality is that, yeah, you might get the volume for sure, but definitely you can't guarantee the quality. So it's you're not being proactive in that case. You're just posting the role and, you don't know what the quality will be. So it's sort of like a black hole. You're not sure who's going to come in.
The next one would be, let's say there's lots of talent in the markets right now. I'm good.
All right. I'd say the reality is that, sure, there might be a lot of talent in the market, but that does not mean that those are the right people that are actually going to move your business forward, specifically also if you're a startup. So there might be someone, coming from like a really big company. They haven't had that startup experience. So they look good on paper, but they're not really right for you because they don't have the experience working with limited resources. So they can't like bring their A game straight away. They're used to a large corporate environment. So yeah, are they the ones that are actually going to move your business forward? May not be the case.
3, I will find the salesperson easily myself. Salespeople are always, online and willing to chat. So that's going to be very easy to fill.
All right. Well, the reality for that is, the best salespeople, I really think, are too busy closing deals. They're not really applying to jobs. They're out there in the market and they're, talking to their customers. They're not necessarily applying to your jobs.
Or they're enjoying their President's Club.
In Hawaii.
Yeah. Yeah. And our final mythbuster is large companies do not need anything else but their employer brand.
The reality is that large companies do want the top 1%, but they understand that hiring is beyond just posting the role on a job board.
I think that recruiting is a very interesting, subject. We can talk about it all day, which is why, I'm in this industry. But if they're doing it, yeah, you should definitely be open and think about, how you're going to build out for your company as you're scaling and growing and, raising, Series A, B, C, wherever, you end up going as far along. But yeah, this was great. And this was us on record.
Great. Thanks for the conversation. And thanks for tuning in, everyone. Talk to you next time.
Talk to you. Bye.
Bye-bye.